Hello, this is Joe Trahan, welcoming you to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooten Foundation, whose mission is to enlighten the world to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances. As the national leader on this subject, they communicate their educational messages through various methods, including this podcast. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Hi, and welcome to the All Me podcast. My name is Tavis Piatoli, sports dietitian for the Taylor Hooten Foundation, and today I'm going to be your host. In 2022 alone, 3 college student athletes took their own life due to the pressures of trying to balance performing at the highest level of their sports and in the classroom, while also trying to maintain a healthy social life. It's evident how difficult that is and the pressure it puts on a young individual. What are the primary factors that are contributing to the mental health issues and illness found in collegiate sports? Also, how can young athletes successfully manage everything and still have adequate balance between life and sport? Should parents of young athletes not demand so much of their children, especially when it comes to being successful in that sport? These are the questions we discuss with Dr. Chelsi Day, sports psychologist for the Ohio State University Athletics Department. Dr. Day is a licensed psychologist who specializes in clinical sports psychology. She was a diver at Miami University where the team won 2 MAC championships during her time. Following her tenure as a Red Hawk, she obtained a master's degree in sports psychology from the Chicago School of Professional Psychology and a master's degree from Antioch University, New England, followed by a doctorate in clinical psychology from Antioch. She has worked in private practice with high school, Olympic, and professional athletes, in college counseling settings, and most recently was a director of counseling in sports psychology at Indiana University before joining Ohio State staff in the fall of 2019. Also, we'd want to make you aware, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. So this is a great time to make sure that you talk to others if they have any issues, but also we'd love for you to share our podcast with anyone in your channels to make them more aware of these social and performance struggles. We'd also like to thank Gatorade, our partner, for sponsoring this podcast. Dr. Day, welcome to the All Me podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. It's an honor to have you here today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited to chat with you.
So we're talking about an extremely important topic, right? Today's topic is really about mental health and athletes, your role really in the collegiate sport section. But really, before we get to the bread and butter of this conversation, let's talk about how you got into this field. So tell our listeners a little bit about your career path and what interested you in the field of sports psychology.
I was a diver at Miami University, go Red Hawks, the real Miami, and I could have used a sports psychologist. I really recognized a need, and for me, it was performance related. That initially I was a big chicken, which is like not great for being a diver. I know now after pursuing this career path and moving from undergrad straight into my PsyD in clinical psychology with a specialization in sports psychology, that I could have also used a sports psychologist from the mental health side. I injured myself. I broke my foot in a couple of places my freshman year, battled that injury throughout, and ended up having surgery just before my senior year. So I did not dive my senior year. And now I know that all of the behaviors I engaged in as a young athlete were all of the behaviors that occur when someone is struggling to deal with injury and transition out of sport. And so that really paved the way for me to kind of pursue this career path.
Excellent. Yeah, it's always interesting when you hear what interests people to choose a specific career. I struggled wanting to be a doctor or pediatrician, combining that at LSU with having too much fun my freshman year and realizing I'm not ever getting into that school. So we got to do something else, right? So let's talk about your role and what you do as a psychologist in athletics. So what is the role of psychologists in athletics? And, are you seeing athletes and what type of situations do you typically see athletes for?
Sports psychology is kind of thought about in 2 veins, really. There's the performance enhancement side and there's the clinical side, so the mental health perspective. For a lot of us, we do both. So in my role at Ohio State and with our team of folks, we're really focused on the holistic intervention. So most of what we do is one-on-one meetings with student athletes, primarily mental health or mental wellness related. So sometimes it's adjustment and sleep issues, or my relationships, my roommate sucks, or I hate my teachers or my coach, stuff like that. And sometimes it's, depression, suicidality, crippling anxiety. And then a smaller portion of that is just performance. Either I know I'm capable of performing better, but I'm not doing it, and I can't figure out why. I've done all the other things, or things are going well and I want a mental edge and I haven't focused on my mental game. And so we can help people with the mental skills training for that. We also kind of have team interventions. So each of us is assigned to a variety of teams. So I'm the team psychologist for about 14 of our teams at Ohio State, which means I'm the kind of go-to. Now, our athletes can see anyone individually, but I'm kind of the go-to for keeping an eye on the team, knowing what's going on, talking to coaches, helping if the team wants presentations, maybe I'm doing those presentations, or I'm finding out who can. We consult with our sports medicine staff all the time. We're always talking with our nutrition staff and strength staff and administrators to kind of be the conduit for helping describe, explain, and facilitate conversations around mental health impact on all of those other areas, and to understand what's being done in those other areas that might impact mental health. So we kind of help tie in some of that holistic perspective for both athletes individually, on a team base, and on a departmental level.
Excellent. Yeah. I guess adults, you think, oh, athletes, they're great. They got everything for them. They're playing college sports. There's no reason to be nervous or excited or anxious. But I guess I don't realize those pressures. And you mentioned some of those common reasons why you see those athletes, from performance enhancement, mental awareness, or mental health, and even not liking their roommate, right? It's like, if I had to go back, I would do things a little bit differently with some of the people I lived with as well. But it wasn't to that point where it drove me off the edge, but I can see how that can happen. What are some of the common things you're trying to accomplish when you do the consulting process? When they come to you, what's the obvious, and I'm sure this is going to be a little different from the type, but what do you want to, what's the end result that you want to get out of this?
I mean, the end result really is focused on getting someone where they want to be in the topic that they bring to us. So there are times where, if I'm the team psychologist for a team and that person comes in for something, I might know a fair bit about what's going on for them. That doesn't mean that that's what they're coming in to talk about. And so my focus is really on what brings you in today and what are you hoping to get out of this. It's not to change someone's mind. It's not to convince them what's wrong, much to a coach's dismay. Coaches may send them in for something and they're not interested to talk about that. And so my goal is really to understand what they want to get out of it and then help them get there. So whether it's feeling better, whether it's feeling more confident, whether it's feeling less of something, whether it's enhancing something, that our goal is to work together to get them wherever they want to be on whatever topic they bring to me.
Yeah. And I'm guessing some of these athletes have fear of failure, right? It's like, they have this pressure, and that's kind of leading into my next question. We know athletes have a lot on their plate, right? They're trying to balance. And I look at when I was in school 25 years ago, I didn't have social media. Computers were just really becoming like a thing in school. So there was not a lot of access to things. And so when you're trying to balance school, training, performance, a social life, can these factors really lead to more pressure, stress, and impact their mental health?
Absolutely. I didn't have texting in college. And I am so glad that I lived in an era without that. Facebook came out while I was in college, I think my junior or senior year, and it certainly didn't have the capacity to do what it does now. I think that plays a huge role for a lot of reasons: social comparison, bullying, fan access. I have an athlete who she's an international student, and after an underperformance at a game, had multiple messages that she showed me on Twitter telling her to go kill herself, that they were going to tell her coach that they should take her scholarship, that they were going to figure out how to get her deported and sent back to home. And people weren't doing that stuff, right? And so I think that there's just a greater access. I think NIL is incredible. I think it's a wonderful opportunity. It's so important for our athletes, but that has added demands. I don't know that our athletes always know what they're agreeing to. And then the time demand that's going to take, a lot of that is social media based for our athletes. They're choosing a lot of social media endorsement things and having to figure out the timing and how to get content created. There are people whose whole jobs is to create content, and they're getting these gigs to do content creation and not realizing how challenging that is. You've got greater pressure on coaches, I think, than you've ever had, because coaches are also accessible on social media, and that trickles down to our athletes, because at the end of the day, the coach can manage practice, but then they have to sit back during a competition and the athlete has to go there and do their thing. And coaches' jobs ride on athlete performance. And so, there's so many variables, with dating apps or hookup apps and hookup culture in college. I mean, that's its whole own thing. You've got interpersonal issues related to hookup culture with people from different teams or with similar people. And I mean, it's just such a different time that it is easy to underestimate the demands that they're under and to think they've got it really good, but they also have so much less control than most college students. So, I mean, I have had at least once a month, I have a student athlete text me to say, hey, coach just called a meeting, or hey, our film time just got moved, or hey, I can't make our appointment for that reason. Whereas it's rare in real life, and occasionally that happens in jobs, but usually you can say, no, I don't want to pick up that shift. It's rare that someone says, hey, move everything. You have to come to this meeting. It's not optional. And so, they're also always knowing that this stuff is shifting. And with Kara and Rara, there's been some help with facilitating the requirement for time, but there's still plenty of wiggle room. So I think they also just have so much less control over their time and their choices with so much on their plate that we really create this pressure situation that they're always riding on the bubble of implosion. And, we do our best to support them, but it's an entirely different experience than when I was an athlete like 20 years ago.
Yeah. It's funny you mention it because I didn't have a cell phone in college. I had a beeper. So if I would drive and I went to LSU, so I would commute just about every weekend because I was working in a nightclub as a bartender just to make money and not pressure my parents for extra cash. So it was like, here's a beeper. Call me if you need me for anything. So I'd have to pull off to the side of the road, use the payphone. And my daughter's like, what's a payphone? What's that? So it's just kind of funny, and you mentioned when I looked at some research in the past, one of the things that I saw for centenarians, people that live to 100 or more, the number one thing they felt, and you would think like health, diet, exercise, all important things that ring tie. But when they asked them, what helped you have good balance in your life and live to 100, they all mentioned a good quality social life. So my next question really is, how is it important for these athletes with so much going on to have a good social life outside of sports and training and class?
I wish I had a magic wand to help make that easier for our athletes. There's also a study that was done with this little town in Italy, and it's a town of people that eat a lot of pasta, tons of carbs, in a way that tons of bread, small village. And when they looked at the factors for longevity and health, they found that it wasn't exercise, that their diet was actually like negatively correlated with what you would expect. It was the relationships. It was a tight-knit community that's supporting each other. That feeling like you were part of a community is what seems to correlate the most to long lives, longer than some of the other areas, bigger cities around them. And so it really is such an important thing. We also know that in this generation, so right now we're dealing with Gen Z athletes. In this generation, loneliness is one of the biggest epidemics there's ever been. And feeling lonely increases your mortality rate by I think it's 23%. Being lonely is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That's the health impact it has on us. So that social connection is really, really important. We don't promote it though. We really want people to be focused. If you want to excel at school and sport, you've got to really hone in on that. And so I think we often do them a disservice by not teaching them how to do that in a balanced way. Because certainly overboard on either side is not going to be helpful. If we're only socializing, we aren't going to give enough time to our studies, or we aren't going to make good health choices that are going to help us perform, right? We're not going to get good sleep. We're not going to maybe have good eating habits. But we know that it's important for self-care and mental health maintenance. It's for physical health maintenance, for our immune system. And so, I'm always really trying to encourage young adults to not just socialize with people inside their sport. Because the other thing that happens is often when you socialize with people within your sport, you have all the same shared experiences and you're often talking about sport. So I'm often encouraging our student athletes to join different student groups, student organizations, even if you can't go to all the meetings because you're busy. How do we get connected with people on other teams and maybe even outside of athletics, study groups for classes? I mean, even though it's school-based, you're still connecting with other people around a shared idea. And I've found that when I can convince my student athletes to do that, they do report feeling healthier, happier, more connected. They're sleeping better. They're less stressed. We're lucky to have a number of student athlete focused student groups at Ohio State. And so even if I can just get them to get involved in one of those, that's a great start. So it really, we know that the mental wellness and the physical health impacts are totally underappreciated. And so it's something that I think we should push, that we need to push more, that we need to really preach the importance of.
It's interesting you mentioned about the loneliness. I would have never thought that correlated to, obviously, increase in mortality. I think you said 23%. My daughter's 11. She does a lot of things, from acting to softball. Now she just started taking crochet. Like, wow. But when she said, Dad, I do this because it helps calm me down. She's got a lot, you wouldn't think an 11-year-old has anxiety and a lot on her plate, but she's like, I'm stressed about this, or I got to perform. And the crocheting is a calm way. So it's a hobby, right? You mentioned some of these hobbies or things they need to do to get their mind off of stuff. That's fascinating. So let's kind of dive into really the prevalence of mental health issues. How prevalent do you see this in college sports, especially where you are at Ohio State? You have a big student body, especially a massive student athlete base.
Yeah, we have about 1,100 student athletes. Last year, we saw just over a third of them in our office. And this year we're tracking to see a little over 40% of them. So, we're getting up there with utilization. What the data tells us is that student athletes experience mental health issues at the same rate as their non-athlete peers. So we know that means about 1 in 3 are going to experience significant anxiety at some point in their life. And 1 in 5 are going to experience mental illness. We know that 5 in 5 experience mental health, right? We all deal with mental health, but 1 in 5 are going to experience serious mental illness issues. So that's kind of that diagnosable range of things. Certainly, many of us have experienced lowercase a anxiety. Maybe it doesn't rise to the level of mental health diagnosis, or have felt depressed. But again, 1 in 5 will be at about that clinical level of diagnosable mental health issues. I think it's, we're recording this in the very first days of May. In the last 30 days, we have lost 3 Division I Power 5 athletes to suicide. And so we see that it's prevalent, right? The rates are there. And that's just the ones we know about. That certainly there are probably some that are maybe categorized differently, or that are from smaller schools that don't hit the media. So we know that, it's an increasing problem. I think I was just talking with a colleague about 30 minutes ago that we're beyond the point where it's about access, that it's not necessarily about access to resources. All 3 of these young women that died by suicide had access to really bright, intelligent mental health providers, and some of them were utilizing those services. I think where we need to start focusing is the culture of sport, and that mental health is an issue. And I think for so long we've thought it isn't an issue in sport. And I don't think it's because anyone had ill will. I think we just didn't want to believe that it was that, but they're fit, they're healthy, they've got a support network, they're achieving, that's fun, it's an activity. And I mean, mental health affects everybody. Mental illness doesn't discriminate. And, we've all got our own predisposition and family histories, and we have a life that happened before we got to college. And we know that, many of our young women will be victims of sexual assault in college, and we've got drinking that can become a problem because it's so normalized, and add all those other things we just talked about a couple questions ago. And so I think that we're seeing mental health issues on the rise. And I think we're all scrambling to figure out what we need to do to be able to provide the type of support that's necessary. I think we've finally gotten to a point where the stigma is reduced. And I think most people really believe that it's okay to not be okay. But if we don't know what to do when we're not okay, it's not just okay to not be okay. We have to have the skills and abilities and tools when we're not okay to be able to come through the other side of that.
Yeah, we saw the death with Katie Meyer at Stanford, the goalkeeper, just the other day. Now, Naomi Judd with her reported suicide. And, you just think people of, obviously it happens in the everyday person that we don't hear about. It's only when you hear about that celebrity status where it really gets, announced and becomes more aware, like, oh, wow, this person who you think would be the happiest person in the world with millions and millions of dollars is actually extremely unhappy because of all the things. You look at Robin Williams, which amazing on film, but then, wow, struggled and battled mental health illness for so long. So what are some of the steps you take with them, when you're working with them? Is there an outlier, number one, that plays a role in their stress? I'm sure there's a lot, but is there one common denominator that you say, this is what you see the most? And then what's a good treatment strategy or approach that you feel really helps them get a little bit better?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think when people start to lack hope, I think that is a really big indicator, hope that things are going to get better. Maybe they've tried things before. One of our football players, Harry Miller, has been really outspoken about his mental health challenges and spoken in the media. And one of the most profound things is that I heard him say was that hope is needing to convince yourself that something is true until you don't need to convince yourself anymore, or something like that. I may have butchered it a little bit, but this idea that, we're trying to build hope in a way that things become true for someone. So, I think that it varies. We also know that insomnia, so regular reduced sleep, is a bigger predictor of a suicide attempt than any mental health diagnosis. So it's a huge red flag to me when someone comes in and they haven't been sleeping, whether it's because they've been stressed and so they haven't done the sleep hygiene to get the sleep, or because they haven't been able to sleep. But we know that poor sleep is a greater predictor than any other of our mental health constructs. So that's a big one that I always I ask everybody how their sleep is. But I think, again, whether it's depression or anxiety, which are our two most prevalent mental health diagnoses, it's when we have that lack of hope that it's going to get better. So someone with an anxious presentation who feels like they're never going to stop feeling this way and they just want it to end, or someone who's in so much emotional pain and they're so depressed that they just can't imagine living another day that way. And so it's when we lose that hope that things can get better. And so, I think on a very existential level, my job is to help find that hope and reinstill that and show them that I'm on that journey with them. I mean, that's one of the biggest honors of my job, is that people come and share with me and allow me on that journey with them. But if we can find ways to regain hope, that to me is the first step toward any intervention that I do actually working, because you're also not going to do something if you don't have hope that it's going to help.
Yeah, it's, I go back to, not at one point in my life, 15, 20 years ago, I didn't believe in anxiety. I didn't think panic attacks were real. I thought when people said they had them, they were just kind of making things up. I saw, my ex-wife have one, and I was like, wow, this is real. And then I thought I had one, I don't know, 10 years ago, or at least the onset of one. And if someone said, this is what you're going to feel like, and these are the concerns and worry you're going to have after you have a child, and this is what it's going to feel like until they go off on their own one day, I would probably have not had children, because it's the level of stress is whole. I'm like, wow, I worry about my child all the time. But at the same time, some people can balance that, and sometimes it's tough. When we look at the athletes, though, there's a lot of pressure, as we've already talked about the mental health side, the mental illness side. I want to talk a little about the performance side, because there's a lot of pressure for them to try to get to that next level. Some of these athletes, they're going to go pro in their sport, and there's a lot of pressure to do that. And when trying to do that, obviously there's things that they go through. Are there any mental conditioning exercises that you do with them to maybe help them, mitigate a little bit of the anxiety they experience with that pressure?
Yeah, I think the performance work is really fun because it translates into life. I always explain mental performance intervention to my athletes in the metaphor of my favorite hobby, which is carpentry. And so when I decided that I was going to get into carpentry, I guess I didn't decide, it found me. But when I started getting into carpentry, I knew I would need a little workshop space in our garage. And I had two ways I could go about it. I could say, you know what, let me look into all the tools to have a basic little wood shop, and let me go invest in all of those things so that whenever I have a project that I need to do or want to do, I have the tools. Or I could say, I'm going to go project by project. As I think of things I want to do, I'll go get those tools, and that's how I'll build my toolbox. And there are mental performance coaches, providers that do things in each way. So I have my standard set. I think everybody needs these skills. Those are often things like goal setting, imagery and visualization, attention and concentration, rebounding from failure, all of those types of things. And then there are some that say, well, let's assess where we're at and let's just give you the skills that you need. For me, when I'm working with college-aged individuals in consulting work, I do it a little bit differently. But when I'm working with college-aged individuals, I take that approach of building the woodshop by task, which is how I build my woodshop as well. And so I kind of see where someone's coming in. Everybody at the college level has had varying levels of performance services. If you've got kids who've been on a national team, they've probably had some experience with sports psychology. You've got kids coming from rural high schools who've never heard of sports psychology. And so, I'm usually really assessing what's our need right now. Usually what I start with is asking them what % of their sport is mental. And I've never had someone say anything less than 50%. And then if I ask them how much of their practice and training is mental, and then they say, none. And so anything is better than nothing. And so, I usually start by really assessing things like self-talk. To me, that's a really, really big piece. It plays into confidence. It plays into attention and concentration. It plays into our ability to set good goals. So for me, that's a foundational skill is that how do we talk to ourselves? Because our body does what our mind tells it. And so if our mind is not telling it nice things, it's not going to do nice things for us. And so, for me, that's the big one. But, all those ones, goal setting, pre-performance routines, all of those things are really, really valuable. And it kind of depends on what the person needs in that moment, whether we're trying to enhance or whether we're trying to identify where a deficit is.
Excellent. Yeah, I want to shift a little bit to the youth market, right? It's, we have the collegiate market. I coach my daughter's softball team. It's a 9 and 10 league, but it's about fun, right? It's just get them better, let them have fun. If they lose, they lose. If they win, they win. It's not about trophies. It's not about any of these things. It's just about the camaraderie and teamwork. But I've seen parents at this level they're way too engaged. They're too involved.
Mm-hmm.
The pressure, the things they yell and scream. It's like, wow, that could provide a lot of impact on that child because they want them to be successful. How might this type of pressure on a young athlete impact them mentally when their parent or guardian are the ones pressuring them for success at all costs? Have you seen anything in that level?
So there's interesting foundational data that talks about when you start getting paid for a hobby, the enjoyment and satisfaction from it decreases. And I think that applies pretty directly to the youth sport model that certainly you're not being paid money at 12, but you're being paid in attention. You're being paid in compliments. You're being paid in approval when your parents get over involved. And so things start to become less fun because what we really want in a high level athlete is an athlete who's intrinsically motivated, that we know that intrinsic motivation produces high performance over the long term. We know that extrinsic motivation, so intrinsic being I'm motivated by personal growth, development, fun, enjoyment, etc., internal stuff. Extrinsic being external factors, whether it's money, whether it's attention, whether it's these other things, parents, coaches pushing us. That certainly, when you have a good relationship with your coach, you want to play well for your coach, but that isn't what motivates you. That isn't the primary motivator. Or you love bonding with your dad because he played baseball, and so you're having so much fun in the backyard. That's that positive affiliation. When you're doing it because your parent is going to yell at you or demean you or criticize you, and you're trying to avoid that dynamic, you're trying to gain that approval, we lose the fun of the game. We're no longer doing it for ourselves or for the sport. We're doing it to avoid something negative in that relationship, which is not healthy in general, whether we're talking sport or not. That, we don't, for a healthy, productive relationship, certainly we do things that make other people happy. And that in turn makes us happy, but we're not doing it to avoid negativity in the relationship. And so what I see in over-involved parents, it's that they have expectations and demands. And I want people to expect excellence. And I want people to want the best for their kids. And I want people to want their kids to achieve everything they're capable of. The difference is when there is emotional and interpersonal punishment that comes when that doesn't happen, right? Because everyone's going to have a bad day. Everyone's going to have a bad game. And so if we can't have positive interactions with our kids, regardless, again, in the short term, you might see an improvement in performance, but you will eventually see quicker and higher rates of burnout, people quitting, performance declines, mental health issues, and occasionally suicides. I'm not saying that over-involved parents cause suicides. Certainly, I'm not saying that, but the trajectory that we can get on when we are totally extrinsically motivated and when we only feel good about ourselves if we perform well for other people, we do set ourselves up for having real mental health crises when we don't succeed the way people expect us to.
Yeah, this was good for me to hear personally, because everything I do with our team, especially my daughter, it's like, look, it's just about getting better, but it's also about just having fun.
Mhm.
You're 9 and 10. So if you don't do these things well right now, it's okay.
Yeah.
As long as you enjoyed it, go home, have fun. And it's not, you're not punished if you strike out. You're not punished if you don't win,
Yes.
at least on my side. And so it's good to hear these things, and where I need to keep my mind just to make sure my daughter still has fun with this. And if she doesn't, and at the end of the day, she goes, I don't want to do that anymore, that's okay. Right.
Absolutely. Yes.
But we talked a lot about the negative side, or at least the mental health challenges that athletes face. But I'm a positive, optimistic person. So let's talk about that side. Is there a time when feeling anxious could also be beneficial, or maybe a little bit helpful for that athlete? Does that mean like, hey, I'm really, I'm prepared, I'm a little nervous, but I'm excited because it means a lot to them?
Dead on. Yes. I think that any feeling that we feel, emotion, anything that we experience is just our mind and body sending us a message. That's all it is. It's a message. We decide what we do with that. Now, again, in case of panic attacks, we went from 0 to 60. And so we didn't decide I want to have a panic attack, but we didn't have the opportunity to decide. We went right into fight or flight, right? We had this automatic response. But we know that if we can slow down, be present, and understand the feeling that we're feeling, that it absolutely can be a benefit. So if we think about that lowercase a anxiety, that performance anxiety, it's our body saying like, we're about to do something. And usually it's like, we're about to do something maybe scary or cool or something we've never done. It's new, it's unknown. And if we can understand where that's coming from and why, it absolutely helps to kind of unleash some of that power, that if we can view it as a message of priming and ready, it can absolutely be helpful. I have what I have only recently accepted is a little bit of social anxiety. And how that shows up is that occasionally not occasionally, almost every time when I give talks, I love giving presentations. I love talking at conferences. It's one of my favorite things to do, but I wake up and I'm certain I'm going to throw up. I don't have a single anxious thought. But my body is like, oh my God. And I am nauseous and I'm a little bit lightheaded and I'm a little bit sweaty and I'm just uncomfortable in my skin. And that used to freak me out. I used to be like, I have this performance anxiety. This is awful and terrible. And now what I've realized is like, I know that I love these things. And as soon as I start talking, I am in my element. And it's my body saying, let's freaking go. Like, we got this thing and it's exciting. And I want you to be sharp. Because when we think about anxiety, performance anxiety specifically, we are understanding that fight or flight response. So we do become more focused. We do become more able to kind of maintain. So if we think about fight or flight, right? At an extreme level, we need to be able to flee. So our heart rate's up, our blood is pumping, our muscles are ready to go, the tension is there. At a lower level, our muscles are tense in a way that are going to allow us to do what we need to do, that we're going to have the right amount of blood flow and oxygen moving and the ability for our body to engage in the things that it needs to. It's going to allow me to stay focused on what I'm talking about instead of distracted by things around me. Whereas if I was too relaxed, I might be distracted by noise. I might be distracted by what people I'm talking to are doing. And so some of that allows us to have that low level fight or flight that, again, if there's a bear coming in the room I'm in right now, I want every part of my body to be so activated that I can beat that bear out of this room. On a lower level, I still want to be able to do that. I want my body to be activated enough that I can achieve the task I'm trying to achieve, which in my case might just be giving a talk. And so if we can conceptualize it, that we all have a zone of optimal functioning, and there's some debate to the model that has existed in the past, but we do know that some of that experience actually helps us perform better. It's all about how we perceive it. That stress can be a good thing. It's not always bad, but it all comes down to what we call in psychobabble, our cognitive appraisal, how we appraise the situation in our mind.
Yeah, I mean, I've in the past, I've spoken in front of so many people at conferences and events and programs, and for years never had an issue. All of a sudden, one day, it's like, what's going on? I can't breathe before I get on. And they're reading the bio, and I'm like, am I going to be able to do this? Like, what's changed so much to where now I'm anxious because I know the topic. It's just, it's interesting how the body, when you get older, I don't know if it's older or just, I don't know. I don't know if it's a mental thing. It must be, but yeah, it's comfortable. But like you said, once you get started, that anxiety starts to go away because I can breathe again. So it's interesting.
Yes.
All right, I know we just have a few more minutes left. Let's talk about athlete success a little bit, because, we know we have athletes that have a lot of success, and I want to see, are there any common qualities, habits, strategies that you see in those who have found the most success as athletes that allow them, that maybe they have good balance in their life? Are there any things that stand out when it comes to their traits on why they're successful outside of just they're good, right? They're good athletes.
Mm-hmm. So I'm gonna get in the weeds a little bit, because I think that there's a difference in personality in terms of short-term success and long-term success. Because I think that you can be not so resilient, not so mentally tough, you can have poor life balance, and you can achieve a high level of success in a short period of time. That most athletes who have the physical prowess and the physical kind of makeup to be able to achieve are going to be able to maximize that, even if they're not making good choices in a short-term way. But we know the fall off the back of that, if we don't address a lot of things, that's where the problem is. So in terms of getting to peak performance, I think that there's a lot of skill and luck that occur there physically. I think people who have sustained success, so people who have long careers of success, those are the folks that we see that have that mental toughness, which, do we know how we really define that? Not really. We kind of all have an idea of what it means. But when I think about it, I think resilience, I think good support, good balance. They're people often who understand their body and are doing what they need to take care of their body, whether we're talking nutrition or sleep or training and rest and recovery, whether we're talking about people who recognize that they aren't their sport, they have a good, healthy identity beyond their sport. And so they love their sport. It's most of their life, but they also understand that maybe they are partner, parent, brother, daughter, all of those types of things. And they understand that there's, a variety of roles. I think that the ability to adapt and cope with failure and see failure as a learning experience and failure as positive versus as kind of the sky falling. So I think those are some of the biggest factors that differentiate, people with long-term success, because I think that requires so much more mental strength, just like any of us. Like, I think anyone can put their head down and achieve something. I think that's why we see post-Olympic depression and suicidality is very high, because people have been singularly focused for this kind of cycle, which is also why many people only go to one Olympics. And so you have done it. That's been your only focus. And now what? Now, who am I? What do I have? And, I don't have that balance. And so we see then a lower likelihood of repeating. That was not as direct of an answer as I had intended, but those are some of the factors and variables.
No, yeah, and we've seen some of those top athletes. I've seen some of the top tennis players. So Pam Barty just retired at 28, 29, really young. Mm-hmm. We've seen other athletes really, like you said, won Olympics, and they come out with announcing, hey, I'm struggling, with anxiety. I'm struggling with mental health issues. And it's like, wow. But then you realize they've probably gone through so much pressure, especially like gymnasts, yes. Right? They have to maintain a physique, a body weight. I'm sure they're having disordered eating around that. And, although they reached the pinnacle of being maybe the top 5 elite in order to participate in the Olympics, it's like, to get there, people don't understand. It's not all cookies and cream. It's a lot of battles.
Yes.
We've talked about the treatment perspective, obviously, the things that you do from a consulting standpoint. We know exercise is almost like the best drug to help with reducing anxiety. But as a sports dietitian, I'm going to ask this question because I've seen a little bit of data around some things, but are there any nutritional therapies that you've seen? Maybe it's omega-3, maybe it's other things that can maybe help improve outcomes.
Yeah, I think that that's one of the things that I work most closely with our sport dietitians around is we know that, even just basic vitamins and minerals and nutrients, right? So we know that vitamin D, vitamin B12, we know that low iron can cause significant fatigue. Fatigue can then lead to depressive feelings. We know that thyroid issues can lead to depression and anxiety. And so, I am often cross-referring, even outside of obviously the pathology, eating disorder, stuff like that. But even with lower level stuff, we know that what we put in our body makes a difference. And so, I always joke like that's above anything I conceptually understand. And I purposefully don't understand it to stay in my lane. I think knowledge is power, and sometimes too much knowledge, I can know enough to be harmful and not enough to be helpful. So, but those are the things that I see in terms of why don't we go talk with sports nutrition and make sure, if you're on supplements, they're the right ones, but how do we work with maybe team doc to get the blood work? And then let's get that blood work results to our dietitians to say what kind of supplementation makes sense, because there are a lot that have some mood improvement. And I tend to think, here's the other thing. I believe in placebo effect, and I love placebo effect, that if I can give you something and you will feel better, I don't care if it's actually doing it as long as it's not hurting you. So I think there are also aspects where various nutritional interventions make people feel physically better. And maybe there's not, if we did a controlled scientific study, maybe omega-3s don't actually boost serotonin, so they're not actually helping with depression, but maybe those omega-3s help me feel better, and feeling better reduces my mental load, and therefore I feel better. I tend to believe that whatever we can do that's going to help. And if someone wants to say these omega-3s are the reason I don't feel depressed, fine, happy, great. Don't care if that's proven in the scientific literature. If you felt like it helped, and I'm here for it. So I do think, again, a lot of our, we don't have a lot of hard data on a one-to-one kind of causation, but I know from my own experience, I'm on a variety of supplements because apparently, I don't know if it's a poor diet or I'm going to blame my body and the ability to process different things. My doctor might just tell me more vegetables and less bread, but I have felt the power of supplementation and the way that has made me feel better, and the way that has increased. When I feel more energetic, I feel more resilient. When I feel less tired, I feel more capable to emotionally take things on. And so, I think that there are a lot of ways in which our nutrition, whether through whole foods or supplementation, plays a major factor, even if it wasn't the deficiency that caused.
Got it. Excellent. Last question, Dr. Day. If you have to give our listeners just a few tips or some key habits that you feel that have been proven to improve mental health, what would some of those be?
I implemented a strategy that I had thought about and read about in a variety of different ways. I just implemented it over the weekend. And I made a matrix of things that fill my cup. I guess it was like a linear graph, things that fill my cup to things that drain my cup. And I put all of the tasks that I have on that spectrum to understand what I need to be focused on, because there are tasks I have to do that don't fill my cup. I found that grocery shopping was right in the middle. Doing our bills and budget was just slightly toward emptying my cup. I actually found that cleaning bathrooms was on the far end. And so then I told my husband, we're getting someone to clean our bathrooms. I can't, it drains my cup so much that I have feelings about it when I have to do it. And we are in a place that I can get someone to clean.
You gotta make him do
it. Which, yeah, no, thank you. You know how I'm going to do a big old stereotype. You know how women can be. We want you to do it, but we want you to do it our way. And if you don't do it our way, we're not happy. And so I know that about myself. I have that insight. If he did it, I would tell him I didn't like how he did it. So we'll have a professional do it. But I think that to me was applying a lot of things that I know. How do we understand what works well for us and what doesn't? We tend to avoid thinking about that because it can be kind of depressing to look at the things that don't fill our cup or the things that drain us, because a lot of those things are things we have to do. And so then when we look at that and understand what fills my cup, am I doing enough of it? Do I need to do more of it? So if socializing fills my cup, am I prioritizing that? If exercise fills my cup, am I prioritizing that? Or is that falling down the list of to-dos and I'm prioritizing things that drain me and then I'm wondering why I don't feel well? And so, I don't necessarily do that particular exercise. It feels a bit mundane for some of my athletes, but that's what we talk about a lot. What makes things feel better? What makes things feel worse? And how do we amplify the things that feel better? And how do we adjust the things that feel worse? And we can't get rid of all of those, but that if I boil it down, that's kind of where we're at. Is it doing a hobby? Is it getting more sleep? Is it, this, that, or the other? And that's how we create that balance, by making sure that we know where stuff falls on it and that we're doing those things strategically.
Yeah, no, I love that, because I look at those things for myself and my family. It's like, where am I the most joyful, right?
Mm-hmm.
The weeks I have my daughter, the time where my wife and daughter and I are doing things, I'm spending time coaching baseball. Mm-hmm. I play my guitar if I'm a little stressed. My daughter and I do music together. I even have a massive sports card collection I'm starting to sell to put on eBay to save for college, right? So it's like all those little things are just, they're distractions, but they're good distractions. So I love how you mentioned, how do you fill your cup? I'm even going to kind of write some of those things down. I know you're presenting at a conference. I want to, before we close out, I had just a few little curveball questions. I think we can get through really quick. I always ask this when to start, because if I could go back in life, I would be a musician full time. I sang in a 90s alternative cover band for years as fun. So my first question for you is, if you could be the lead singer in any band today, or just in general, who would that be?
I would totally pick Spice Girls. And here's why. I have to give you a little bit of the why. Not because they were obviously they were superstars, not because it was high quality music, but I feel like they had to have the most fun being like a girl squad. It was one of the women empowerment. They wore what they wanted. Everyone had their own little thing. It wasn't everyone cookie cutter. Certainly I understand there was probably a lot of production behind that, but I'm going to live in my naivete that they all got to pick that. So I think that would be the most fun.
Awesome. No, that's cool. They definitely had a unique little presence to them, for sure. If you had one superpower in life, what would that be?
To teleport. I love to travel. I joked, I took a 6 a.m. flight today. I'm not a morning person. And so what that meant was my plane departed at 6:10 and then it landed at 6:20 because it was an hour time difference. And not being a morning person, I had to live 6:30 a.m. 2 times today. And I don't like to see 6:30 one time. And so if I could just teleport and be where I want to go in an instant, I think I'd be a lot happier.
Like the movie Jumper, right? You just jump and all of a sudden, boom.
Oh, yes.
I love that movie.
Awesome.
All right, last question. What's one thing about you that very few people know anything about, that you think is maybe pretty cool, or like, hey, something you just don't talk about?
So I'm a first generation college student. That in my immediate family, nobody went to college before me. And so I had to navigate the college application process by myself and kind of winged it, and didn't have anyone to guide me into the graduate school process because I didn't know I was supposed to ask people questions. And I'm pretty feisty. And I think people think that because I'm loud with a lot of opinions that I probably have always had my act together. But I am almost always making things up as I go. And I think being a first generation college student is what set me up for that, of just just figure things out, that we'll get there somehow, some way. So I think that's something I don't talk about a whole lot because I don't know, it doesn't come up.
Awesome. Dr. Day, you said, look, you're presenting at this conference, at the Big Ten conference. You said, I need to be done at 9:05 Central. It's 9:04 Central, and it's actually 9:05 Central on my computer. We are done. Thank you so much for taking time.
Thank you.
Schedule. Honored to have you. And we hope to have you back in the near future. Have a wonderful presentation, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much. This was super fun.
Well, that's it for today's show. Thanks for listening to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooten Foundation, a nonprofit organization leading a national campaign to enlighten people to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances and inspiring people to live and compete without the use of these substances. Please be sure to subscribe to our podcast and tune in to our next episode.